The morning sun was just starting to peek over the mountains when Mary Collins stepped up into the dusty stagecoach. Her hands were shaking as she clutched her small bag. Inside that bag was everything she owned in the world. A few dresses, some undergarments, a brush for her hair, and a photograph of a man she had never met. The man who was going to be her husband? Mary was only 19 years old, but she felt much older. Life back in Ohio had been hard. Her father died when she was 16, and her mother got sick soon after. Mary had worked in a textile factory to pay for medicine, but it was never enough. When her mother died last winter, Mary had nothing left. No family, no money, and no hope. That was when she saw the advertisement in the newspaper. Good Christian man seeks wife, must be willing to travel west. Right to William Turner, Silver Creek, Colorado. She was not the only woman on the stagecoach that morning. 4 other women sat with her, all looking just as nervous as she felt. Helen Burke was a widow from Pennsylvania. Her husband had died in a mining accident, leaving her with debts she could not pay. She was 25 and had answered an advertisement from a shop owner named Turles Reed. Helen kept touching her wedding ring from her first marriage. She wondered if her new husband would mind that she had been married before. Lucy Grant was. From New York, she was 22 and had been working as a maid in a rich family's house. The family's son had gotten her in trouble, and when the family found out, they threw her out on the street. She saw an advertisement from a rancher named John Miller, who wanted a wife to help him run his cattle. Ranch, Lucy hoped he would be kind to her. Rose Parker was the oldest of the 5 women. She was 28 and had been taking care of her sick parents for 10 years. When they both died within a month of each other, Rose realized she had spent her best years caring for others. She wanted a life of her own. She had written to a man named Frank Stone, who owned a general store in Silver Creek. He promised her a good home and children. She would come west. The youngest woman was Kate Murphy. She was only 18 and had been working in a clothing factory in Philadelphia. The work was hard and the pay was little. She shared a tiny room with 3 other girls and barely had enough to eat. When she saw an advertisement from a blacksmith named George Adams, she thought it might be her chance for a better life. Kate was scared, but she was also excited. She had never been anywhere outside of Philadelphia. The stagecoach driver was Jake Morrison. He was a big man with gray hair and a thick beard. Jake had been driving stagecoaches for 20 years. He had seen all kinds of people travel these roads. Farmers, miners, businessmen, and many women like these 5. Jake was a good man who always tried to take care of his passengers. He knew the roads through the mountains could be dangerous, especially when the weather was bad. Sitting next to Jake was another passenger. His name was Ben Carter, and he was different from the 5 women. Ben was going home, not running away from something. He was 32 years old and had grown up in these mountains. His family had been some of the first settlers in Colorado. Ben knew every trail, every canyon, every dangerous spot between Denver and Silver Creek. He had spent the last 2 weeks in Denver buying supplies for the winter, and now he was eager to get back to his small cabin in the mountains. Ben was a quiet man who did not talk much, but he was always watching. He watched the sky for signs of bad weather. He watched the horses to make sure they were not getting tired. He watched the road ahead for problems. Ben had learned to be careful in the mountains. One mistake could mean death. As the stagecoach rolled out of Denver that morning, the weather looked good. The sky was clear and the sun was warm. The 5 women tried to talk to each other, but it was hard. They were all scared about what was waiting for them. They were going to marry men they had never met, in a place they had never seen. Some of them wondered if they were making a big mistake. Mary looked out the window at the mountains getting bigger and bigger. She had never seen anything so tall and wild. In Ohio, the land was flat and covered with farms. Here the mountains reached up to touch the clouds. It was beautiful, but it was also frightening. She pulled out the photograph of William Turner and looked at it again. He was not a handsome man, but he had kind eyes. At least she hoped they were kind. Helen was thinking about her first husband. He had been a good man who loved her very much. She missed him terribly. She wondered if she could ever love another man the way she had loved him. Charles Reed's letters had been polite and proper, but they did not show much feeling, she hoped. He would be patient with her while she learned to care for him. Lucy was trying not to think about what had happened to her in New York. She wanted to forget about that part of her life and start over. John Miller had written that he needed a strong woman to help him with his ranch. Lucy had grown up on a small farm, so she knew about animals and hard work. She hoped that would be enough. Rose was the most practical of the 5 women. She had spent years taking care of sick people, so she knew how to work hard. Frank Stone had written that he needed someone to help in his store and to keep house. For him, Rose thought she could do that. She just hoped he would treat her well and maybe give her the children she had always wanted. Kate was the most excited and the most scared. Everything was new to her. She had never been on a stagecoach before. She had never seen mountains before. She had never been away from her family before. George Adams had written friendly letters that made her laugh. She hoped he was as nice as his letters made him seem. As the morning went on, the stagecoach climbed higher into the mountains. The road became narrower and more winding. Jake had to slow down the horses because the turns were sharp and the drop-offs were steep. Ben watched the sky and noticed that clouds were starting to gather. He had seen this before. The weather in the mountains could change very quickly. By noon, the wind was getting stronger and the temperature was dropping. The 5 women pulled their shawls tighter around their shoulders. Jake was having to work harder to control the horses. They were getting nervous about something. Animals could sense danger before people could. Ben leaned over and said something quietly to Jake. Jake nodded and looked worried. They were still several hours away from Silver Creek, and the weather was getting worse. Ben knew these mountains, and he knew that a storm was coming. A bad storm. The first drops of rain started falling just after 1 o'clock. There were big, heavy drops that made loud sounds when they hit the roof of the stagecoach. Inside, the 5 women looked at each other with worry. They had all heard stories about mountain storms and how dangerous they could be. Jake Morrison felt the horses pulling harder against the reins. The animals were scared. Their ears were back and their eyes were wide. Jake had been driving stagecoaches for 20 years, and he knew when horses were afraid, something bad was coming. Ben Carter was watching the sky and the road ahead. The clouds were getting darker and thicker. The wind was getting stronger too. Ben had grown up in these mountains, and he could read the signs. This was not going to be a gentle rain. This was going to be a big storm, the kind that could kill people. The rain started coming down harder. Soon, it was pouring so hard that Jake could barely see the road in front of him. The horses were slipping on the wet ground, and the wooden wheels of the stagecoach were sliding in the mud. Jake had to slow down even more, but he knew they needed to find shelter soon. Inside the stagecoach, the women were holding on to each other as the coach rocked back and forth. Mary Collins was feeling sick from all the movement. Len Burke was praying quietly. Lucy Grant was looking out the window, trying to see how far they were from the edge of the cliff. Rose Parker was holding Kate Murphy's hand because the youngest girl was crying. Ben leaned over and shouted to Jake over the noise of the storm. "We need to stop and wait this out. The road is too dangerous." Jake shook his head. "There is no place to stop here. The road is too narrow. We have to keep going until we find a wider spot." But Ben knew they were in trouble. He could see that. The rain was washing away parts of the road. Ground was soft here, and the heavy stagecoach was making it worse. Every time the wheels rolled over a spot, more dirt and rocks fell away. The horses were getting more and more frightened. They could smell danger in the air. Thunder was rolling across the mountains, getting closer and closer. When the lightning started, the horses almost ran off the road. Jake had to pull hard on the reins to keep them under control. Inside the stagecoach, the women could feel that something was very wrong. The coach was not moving smoothly anymore. It was bouncing and sliding, and they could hear Jake shouting at the horses. They could also hear Ben's voice, but they could not understand what he was saying over the noise of the storm. Then it happened. The stagecoach was going around a sharp turn when the road gave way. The ground just disappeared under the left wheels. Jake felt the coach tilting, and he knew there was nothing he could do to stop what was about to happen. Jake shouted, but his words were lost in the wind and rain. The stagecoach tilted more and more until it was balancing on the edge of the cliff. A moment it seemed like it might stay there. Then the soft ground under the right wheels gave way too, and the whole coach started to fall. Ben Carter was thrown from his seat right away. He flew through the air and grabbed onto a strong pine tree that was growing out of the side of the cliff. The branches scratched his face and arms, but he held on tight. He watched in horror as the stagecoach tumbled down the rocky slope below. The coach hit the ground hard and bounced high into the air. Then it hit again and started rolling over and over. The women inside were screaming, but their voices were quickly lost in the terrible noise of breaking wood and metal. The horses were still tied to the coach, and they were pulled down with it, their frightened cries echoing off the canyon walls. Ben could hear the coach crashing through trees and hitting rocks as it fell. It seemed to take forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. Then there was a final loud crash, and everything went quiet except for the sound of the rain. Ben hung from the tree branch, breathing hard and trying to understand what had just happened. His shoulder hurt badly, and he was bleeding from many cuts, but he was alive. He looked down into the canyon and could see the stagecoach far below. It was upside down and broken into pieces. He could not see any movement. Carefully, Ben climbed down from the tree to a small ledge. His shoulder was hurt, but he could still use his arms. He had to get down to the stagecoach to see if anyone was still alive. He knew the way down would be dangerous, but he had to try. It took Ben almost an hour to climb down to the bottom of the canyon. He had to move slowly and carefully because the rocks were wet and slippery. Several times he almost fell, but he kept going. He had to know if the others were alive. When he finally reached the wreckage, Ben's heart sank. The stagecoach was completely destroyed. The wooden sides were broken into pieces, and the metal parts were twisted and bent. 2 of the horses were dead, crushed under the heavy coach. The other 2 horses were still alive, but badly hurt and trapped under the wreckage. But Jake Morrison was not so lucky. Ben found the driver's body near some large rocks. Jake had been thrown from the coach early in the fall and had hit the rocks. Ben could see right away that Jake was dead. Ben took off his hat and said a quick prayer for the man who had tried so hard to keep them all safe. Then Ben heard something that made his heart jump. It was a woman's voice, weak and full of pain, but it was definitely a voice. Someone was alive in the wreckage. Ben started pulling away pieces of broken wood and metal. "Hello?" he called out. "Can you hear me?" "I am here to help you." "Help us," came a weak voice from inside the wreckage. "Please help us." Ben worked as fast as he could, but he had to be careful not to make the wreckage shift and hurt whoever was trapped inside. As he pulled away more pieces, he could see that the coach had landed upside down, and the women were trapped underneath it. One by one, Ben found all 5 women. Mary Collins was unconscious, and her arm was bent at a strange angle. Blood was running down her face from several deep cuts. Helen Burke was awake, but very pale. She was having trouble breathing, and Ben worried that she was hurt inside. Lucy. Grant was confused and kept asking where she was. There was a big bump on her head, and her eyes did not look right. Rose Parker was crying from pain. Her leg was broken, and Ben could see the white bone sticking through her skin. It was a very bad break. Kate Murphy seemed to be the least hurt, but she was shaking all over and could not stop crying. Ben looked around at the 5 injured women and felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Jake was dead, the horses were dying, and they were trapped at the bottom of a canyon with no way to call for help. The storm was still raging above them, and night was coming soon. Ben knew that no one would come looking for them in this place. The canyon was not on any maps, and most people did not even know it existed. If they were going to survive, it would be up to him to find a way out. But first, he had to keep these 5 women alive through the night. Ben Carter knew he had to act fast. The 5 women were badly hurt, and the storm was getting worse. Night was coming, and the temperature was dropping. If he did not do something soon, they would all die from cold and their injuries. First, Ben needed to make shelter. The canyon walls were steep and rocky, but he found a place where some large rocks made a small cave. It was not very big, but it would have to do. He started carrying the women one by one to the shelter. Mary Collins was still unconscious, so Ben had to carry her first. Her broken arm hung loose, and blood kept running from the cuts on her face. Helen. Burke could walk a little bit, but she was very weak. She kept holding her side and breathing in short, painful breaths. Ben worried that she was hurt inside her body where he could not see. Lucy Grant was awake now, but she was confused. She kept asking where her mother was, even though her mother had been dead for years. The bump on her head was very big and turning purple. Rose Parker was in terrible pain from her broken leg. The bone was sticking out through her skin, and she was losing a lot of blood. Ben knew he had to do something about that leg right away, or Rose would die. Kate Murphy was the only one who could help him. She was hurt too, but not as badly as the others. Ben tore his shirt into strips to make bandages. He also pulled cushions from the broken stagecoach to make beds for the women. Cushions were wet from the rain, but they were better than the cold, hard ground. He found a piece of wood that he could use as a splint for Rose's leg. Kate, Ben said to the youngest. Woman, I need your help. Can you hold Rose's leg while I try to fix it? Kate was scared, but she nodded. She had never seen so much blood before, but she knew Rose would die if they did not help her. Ben worked as carefully as he could, but Rose screamed when he moved her leg. The sound echoed off the canyon walls like the cry of a wild animal. Ben pushed the bone back under the skin and tied the wooden splint to Rose's leg with strips from his shirt. It was not perfect, but it was the best he could do. Rose had passed out from the pain, which was probably better for her. Next, Ben looked at Mary's broken arm. It was not as bad as Rose's leg, but it still needed to be fixed. Eat another splint and tied Mary's arm against her body so it could not move. Mary was still unconscious, which made it easier to work on her. The hardest part was Helen Burke. Ben could not see what was wrong with her, but he knew she was hurt inside. Her skin was very pale, and she was sweating even though it was cold. She kept trying to sleep, but Ben knew he had to keep her awake. People with inside injuries could die if they went to sleep. Helen, Ben said, shaking her gently. You have to stay awake. Talk to me. Tell me about your husband. Helen opened her eyes slowly. Which husband? She asked weakly. The dead one, or the one I have never met? Ben was glad she could still think clearly. That was a good sign. Tell me about both of them, he said, as Helen talked. Ben checked on Lucy Grant. The bump on her head was very big, but she seemed to be thinking more clearly now. She remembered where she was and what had happened. Ben gave her some water from his canteen and told her to rest. By the time Ben finished taking care of all the women, it was completely dark. The storm was still raging outside their small shelter. Lightning lit up the canyon walls, and thunder crashed overhead. Ben built a small fire using dry wood he found under the shelter of the rocks. The fire gave them light and a little warmth. Ben looked at the 5 women lying around the fire. They were all alive, but he did not know how long they would stay that way. Helen was getting worse. Her breathing was shallow, and she was very hot. Ben was afraid she had something broken inside. Her body that was making her sick. Rose was unconscious from the pain of her broken leg. Even with the splint, Ben could see that the leg was swelling up. He was worried that it might get infected. Without proper medicine, an infection could kill her. Mary was still unconscious too, but her breathing was steady. The cuts on her face had stopped bleeding, and her broken arm was secure. Ben thought she had the best chance of getting better. Lucy seemed to be improving. The confusion from her head injury was going away, and she was able to help Kate take care of the others. Kate was the strongest of all the women. She had cuts and bruises, but nothing was broken. She became Ben's helper, bringing water and keeping the fire going. As the night went on, Ben realized they faced a terrible choice. They could not stay in the canyon. The women needed real medical help, the kind that only a doctor could give. But some of them were too hurt to travel. If Ben tried to move them, they might die on the way. If he'd left them here while he went for help, they might die before he could get back. Ben knew the canyon they were in very well. He had hunted here many times as a boy. The canyon was deep and narrow, with walls too steep for most people to climb. There was only one way out that he knew of, and it was very dangerous. It required rope climbing and rock climbing skills that most people did not have. The closest town was Pine Ridge, about 15 miles away through the mountains. But it was not 15 miles of easy walking. It was 15 miles of climbing over rocks, crossing streams, and finding paths through thick forest. In good weather, Ben could make the trip in one day. But with the storm and the dangerous conditions, it would take much longer. Ben made his decision as he watched Helen getting sicker. He would have to take the strongest woman with him and try to reach Pine Ridge. They would bring back help for the others. It was risky, but it was their only chance. He looked at Kate Murphy, who was sitting by the fire taking care of Lucy. Kate was young and strong. She had shown courage during the crisis. She would have to be the one to come with him. "Kate," Ben said quietly, so the others could not hear. "I need to talk to you." Kate came over to where Ben was sitting. Her face was dirty and scratched, but her eyes were clear and determined. "We cannot stay here," Ben told her. "The others need a doctor, and no one will find us in this canyon. I know a way out, but it is very dangerous. I need someone to come with me to get help. Will you do it?" Kate looked back at the other women. Lying around the fire, Mary was still unconscious. Helen was getting worse by the hour. Rose was moaning in her sleep from the pain of her broken leg. Lucy was trying to stay strong, but she was hurt too. Kate looked back at Ben. "When do we leave?" she asked. Ben was surprised by how brave she sounded. At first light, he said, "We will leave food and water for the others. If we move fast, we can reach Pine Ridge by tomorrow night." Kate nodded. "What do I need to do?" Spent the rest of the night preparing for the journey. He gathered what food and water he could carry. He made sure the fire would keep burning to keep the other women warm. He also wrote a note explaining what had happened in case someone found the women before he got back. As dawn broke over the canyon, Ben and Kate prepared to begin their desperate climb to freedom. Ben Carter and Kate Murphy started their climb out of the canyon just as the sun was coming up. The storm had finally stopped, but everything was still wet and slippery from the rain. Ben carried a small bag with some food and water. Kate had even less, just a small piece of bread and her determination to save the other women before they left. Ben checked on the 3 women they were leaving behind. Mary Collins was still unconscious, but her breathing was steady. Lucy Grant was awake and promised to take care of the others. Helen Burke was very sick. Her skin was hot, and she was talking to people who were not there. Ben was very worried about Helen, but he knew their only hope was to get help quickly. "Take care of them, Lucy," Ben told her. "Keep the fire going and give them water if they wake up. We will be back as soon as we can." Lucy nodded, though Ben could see she was scared. Being left alone with 2 unconscious women and one who was very sick was frightening for anyone. The first part of the climb was the hardest. The canyon walls were straight up and down, like the walls of a building. Ben had to find tiny cracks in the rock where they could put their hands and feet. Kate had never done anything like this before. She was a city girl who had spent her life working in a factory, not climbing rocks. "Do not look down," Ben told her as they started up the wall. "Just look at the rock in front of you. Find the next place to put your hand, then the next place. For your foot, take it slow." Kate tried to do what Ben said, but it was very hard. Her hands were not used to holding onto rough rocks. Soon her fingers were bleeding from the sharp stone. Her arms and legs were shaking from fear and effort. Several times she thought about giving up, but then she remembered Helen's hot face and Rose's broken leg. The other women were counting on her. They climbed for 2 hours before they reached a small ledge where they could rest. Kate's whole body was hurting and she was breathing very hard. Ben was tired too, but he was used to this kind of work. He had been climbing in these mountains since he was a boy. "How much further?" Kate asked, trying not to look down at the canyon floor far below. "We are about halfway up," Ben said. "The next part is a little easier. There are more places too." "Hold on," but Ben was wrong. The next part was even harder. The rock was smooth and wet, with very few cracks for their hands and feet. Worse, the wind was getting stronger as they climbed higher. Several times Kate felt like the wind was going to blow her off the wall. Then disaster almost struck. Kate was reaching for a handhold when her foot slipped on the wet rock. She started to fall, sliding down the rock face with nothing to grab onto. Ben heard her scream and turned just in time to see her falling toward him. Ben let go with one hand and caught Kate's wrist just as she was about to fall past him. When a moment both of them hung there, with Ben holding onto the rock with one hand and Kate with the other. Kate was dangling in the air, looking down at the canyon floor hundreds of feet below. "I have you, Ben," said through gritted teeth. "Do not move. Let me pull you up." Ben's arm felt like it was going to break, but he slowly pulled Kate up until she could get her feet back on the rock. Both of them were breathing hard and shaking from fear. Kate started to cry. "I almost fell," she said. "I almost died." "But you did not fall," Ben said. "You are safe now. We can do this, Kate. We have to do this." They rested on the ledge for a few minutes until Kate stopped shaking. Then they continued climbing. Kate was more careful now, testing each handhold. Before she trusted it with her weight, it took them 4 more hours to reach the top of the canyon. When they finally pulled themselves over the edge, both of them collapsed on the ground, too tired to move. Kate's hands were cut and bleeding. Ben's shoulder, which had been hurt in the stagecoach crash, was very painful. But they had no time to rest. Ben looked around and realized they were not where he had expected to be. The climb had taken them to a different part of the canyon rim. He could see familiar mountains in the distance, but he was not sure exactly where they were. "We are lost," Kate said, seeing the confusion on Ben's face. "Not lost," Ben said. "Just not where I plan to be. I can figure out where we are from. The mountains. See that tall peak over there? That is Eagle Mountain. Pine Ridge is on the other side of it." But getting to Pine Ridge was going to be harder than Ben had hoped. Instead of following a trail he knew well, they would have to make their way through thick forest and over rocky hills. It would take much longer than he had planned. They walked all day through the forest. The trees were so thick that sometimes they could not see the sky. Ben had to stop often to look for landmarks and make sure they were going in the right direction. Kate was getting very tired, but she kept walking. Every step was taking them closer to help for the other women. As the sun was getting low, they came to a fast-moving stream. The water was deep and very cold from the mountain snow. There was no bridge and no easy way to get across. "Can you swim?" Ben asked Kate. Kate shook her head. "I never learned how." Ben looked up and down the stream, trying to find a better place to cross. Finally, he found a spot where a large tree had fallen across the water. The tree trunk was slippery and narrow, but it was their only choice. "I will go first," Ben said. "Then you follow me. Hold on to my hand and do not look at the water." Ben walked carefully across the fallen tree, testing each step. The bark was wet and slippery, and the tree moved a little under his weight.
Owie.
He reached the other side. He turned back for Kate. Kate was terrified. The water rushing below the tree was loud and scary. But she thought about Helen getting sicker and Rose's broken leg getting worse. She had to be brave. Step by step, Kate made her way across the fallen tree. Halfway across, her foot slipped, and she almost fell into the rushing water. But Ben caught her hand and helped her keep her balance. Finally, she made it to the other side. They were both cold and wet, but they kept walking. As darkness fell, Ben realized they would not reach Pine Ridge that night. They would have to spend the night in the forest and finish. The journey in the morning, Ben found a dry spot under some pine trees where they could rest. He built a small fire to keep them warm. They shared the last of their food and water. Kate was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. "Will we make it tomorrow?" Kate asked. Ben looked at the stars through the trees. He was tired and worried, but he tried to sound confident. "Yes," he said. "We will reach Pine Ridge by noon tomorrow, and we will bring help back to the others." But privately, Ben was very worried. They had been gone for almost 2 days already. Helen had been very sick when they left, and she might be dead by now. Rose's broken leg might have gotten infected. Even Mary and Lucy might have gotten worse. Kate fell asleep by the fire, but Ben stayed awake most of the night, was thinking about the 3 women they had left in the canyon and wondering if they would still be alive when help finally arrived. Ben Carter and Kate Murphy woke up at sunrise. They were cold, hungry, and tired, but they knew they had to keep going. The other women had been alone in the canyon for 2 days now, and Ben was very worried about them. He and Kate ate the last of their food and started walking toward Pine Ridge. After walking for 3 hours through the forest, They finally saw smoke rising from chimneys in the distance. Pine Ridge was just ahead. Kate started crying with relief. She had never been so happy to see buildings in her whole life. The first person they met was a man named Tom Wilson, who was chopping wood outside his house. When he saw Ben and Kate, he dropped his axe and ran over to them. They looked terrible. Their clothes were torn and dirty. They had cuts all over their hands and faces, and they could barely walk. "What happened to you two?" Tom asked. "Stagecoach accident," Ben said, breathing hard. "3 women trapped in canyon. Need help now?" Tom did not ask any more questions. He could see that Ben and Kate were in trouble. He took them to the center of town, where other people could help. Pine Ridge was a small town with only about 200 people, but they were good people who helped each other. When Tom Wilson told everyone what had happened, men started coming from all directions. Miners, farmers, shopkeepers, and hunters all wanted to help rescue the women. The town doctor was named William Hayes. He was a kind man who had come west to help people who could not get medical care in the big cities. When he heard about the injured women, he immediately started gathering medical supplies. He put bandages, medicine, and tools in a big bag. "How bad are their injuries?" Dr. Hayes asked Ben. Ben told him about Rose's broken leg with the bone sticking out, Helen's inside injuries, Mary's broken arm, and Lucy's head injury. Dr. Hayes looked very serious as he listened. "We need to get to them quickly," the doctor said. "The woman with inside injuries might not have much time left." Within 2 hours, a rescue party was ready to leave. 12 men volunteered to help, including several miners who knew how to use ropes and climb down cliffs. They brought long ropes, wooden boards to carry the injured women, plenty of food and water. Ben led the rescue party back toward the canyon. Even though he was very tired, he moved as fast as he could. The other men had to work hard to keep up with him. Kate wanted to come too, but Dr. Hayes made her stay in town. She was hurt and exhausted, and she would not be able to help with the rescue. It took the rescue party most of the day to reach the canyon. When they finally arrived, Ben called down to the women below. "Hello, this is Ben. We brought help." For a moment there was no answer. Ben's heart sank. Maybe they were too late. Then he heard a weak voice calling back, "Ben, thank God you are back. We are here." It was Lucy Grant's voice.
Oh.
She sounded very tired, but she was alive. The rescue party quickly set up their ropes and started lowering men down into the canyon. Dr. Hayes went down first, along with his medical supplies. What the? Doctor found at the bottom of the canyon was both better and worse than he had expected. Mary Collins was awake now, though she was in a lot of pain from her broken arm. Lucy Grant was weak, but thinking clearly. Her head injury seemed to be getting better, but Helen Burke and Rose Parker were in very bad condition. Helen had a high fever and was unconscious. She had not been awake for a whole day. Rose's broken leg was swollen and red. The infection that Ben had worried about had started. It was spreading up her leg. Dr. Hayes worked quickly to help the women. He gave Helen medicine to bring down her fever and help her breathe better. He cleaned Rose's leg wound and put new bandages on it. He also set Mary's broken arm properly and checked Lucy's head injury. Getting the women out of the canyon was very difficult and dangerous. The rescue team had to tie each woman to a wooden board and then pull her up the cliff very slowly and carefully. It took 2 men at the top and 2 men at the bottom for each rescue. Mary Collins went up first because her injuries were not as serious. Even though her arm was broken, she could help hold on to the ropes. Lucy Grant went next. She was scared of the height, but she was strong enough to make the trip safely. Rose Parker was much harder to rescue. Her broken leg made it impossible for her to help, and she was unconscious from pain and infection. The men had to tie her very carefully to the board and pull her up inch by inch. Dr. Hayes climbed up beside her to make sure she did not get hurt worse during the rescue. Helen Burke was the last to be rescued, and she was the most dangerous case. She was unconscious and very sick. Dr. Hayes was afraid she might die during the trip up the cliff. But the rescue team was very careful, and they got her to the top safely. By the time all 4 women were out of the canyon, it was getting dark. The rescue party made camp for the night because it would be too dangerous to travel through the mountains in the dark with badly injured people. Dr. Hayes worked through the night to take care of the women. He was most worried about Helen Burke. Her fever was still very high, and she was having trouble breathing. He gave her medicine and kept her warm, but he was not sure if it would be enough. Rose Parker was also in danger. The infection in her leg was getting worse, and Dr. Hayes was afraid he might have to cut off her leg to save her life. He cleaned the wound again and gave her strong medicine to fight the infection. The next morning, the rescue party started the journey back to Pine Ridge. They had made stretchers to carry Helen and Rose, who were too sick to walk. Mary and Lucy could walk, but they needed help because they were still weak from their injuries. It took them all day to reach Pine Ridge. When they finally arrived, the whole town was waiting for them. Kate Murphy ran to meet them, crying with happiness when she saw that all the women were alive. Dr. Hayes took the 4 women to his clinic and worked for 3 more days to save their lives. Helen Burke was sick for a long time. The infection inside her body was very serious, and she almost died twice. But her strong will to live and Dr. Hayes' good care finally helped her get better. Rose Parker's leg was saved, but it took many weeks to heal. Dr. Hayes had to clean the infection out of the wound several times, and Rose was in terrible pain. But the infection finally went away, and her leg healed properly. She would always walk with a small limp, but she could walk. Mary Collins and Lucy Grant got better more quickly. Mary's arm healed straight and strong, and Lucy's head injury did not cause any lasting problems. Both women were grateful to be alive and healthy. The story of the Stagecoach accident and the brave rescue spread all over Colorado. Newspapers wrote about Ben Carter's courage and how he had saved the lives of 5 women. But Ben did not like all the attention, said he had only done what anyone would do. 3 of the women decided to continue to Silver Creek to marry the men who had sent for them. Mary Collins married William Turner, and they had a happy life together. Lucy Grant married John Miller, and she loved working on his ranch. Kate Murphy married George Adams, and they had 4 children. Helen Burke decided not to go to Silver Creek instead. She stayed in Pine Ridge and married Dr. William Hayes. She helped him take care of sick people, and they started the first real hospital in that part of Colorado. Rose Parker decided to go back east to her family. Her broken leg had healed, but the experience had changed her. She wanted to be near people she loved instead of marrying a stranger. Ben Carter became famous throughout Colorado as the man who had saved the mail-order brides. But he did not want to be famous. He went back to his quiet life in the mountains, guiding hunters and travelers. A few years later, he married a schoolteacher named Susan Clark, and they lived happily together for the rest of their lives. The canyon where the accident happened was named Carter's Canyon in Ben's honor. A small monument was built in Pine Ridge to remember the rescue and to honor Jake Morrison, the stagecoach driver who had died trying to keep his passengers safe for the rest of their lives. The 5 women remembered the terrible 3 days when they had faced death together in the canyon, but they also remembered the kindness of strangers who had risked their own lives to save them. It showed them that even in the hardest times, there were good people willing to help.